Well, it's officially the off season, and Owen Timmerding and I, Seth Shaner, are here to take you through what's next for your Cincinnati Bengals here on Welcome to the Jungle. Owen, thanks for sitting down with me again. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. I'm stoked to get into some more serious off-season talk now that we're kind of past the NFL season.
Yeah, and certainly I was in my making my notes here before we went on. I was thinking about it, and it's like, you know, we don't know what the answer to some of the things are that we're going to talk about, including T. Higgins and where he's going to be. But it's one of those deals where time is going to take care of that one.
Mhm.
There's a few avenues that can be taken, but the most likely ones, we're just going to know at some point, relatively shortly, I would think. So I guess first off, though, Super Bowl reaction by you, Owen, a Bengals fan, stuck watching the Chiefs play the Eagles the other night.
I was really surprised with kind of how it went. I thought the Chiefs were going to come out a lot better. I was shocked on how the Eagles came out and just kind of punched them in the mouth, but I enjoyed it because it was fun kind of seeing the Giant get slayed like that. I thought the Eagles kind of had that perfect game plan, very similar to what Tampa did against Mahomes a few years ago. And I the thing I wrote down, my biggest takeaway was that is Philly like the most sneaky, dominant Super Bowl team we've had in a while? They've really kind of just been incredible, especially on that defensive front since like week 8. And
Mm.
they kind of just like flew under the radar because Hertz wasn't great. And it's the Philly media and the Philly fans, and they just like really drag people down. And they're kind of like a mockery to begin with. But like you look at some of their stats and who they beat, and they kind of just like handled business from start to finish. And it was kind of a culmination of that in the Super Bowl.
Well, I think one of the things that's true about the Eagles is they were basically lauded as maybe the best roster, one of
Mhm.
top 2, 3 rosters in the league. And we know as Bengals fans, especially of a 2015 Bengals team and even a 2013 Bengals team before some injuries to Geno Atkins and some other guys, um, the best team roster wise doesn't always win, right?
Mhm.
So, they did take that next step. I mean, but Nick Sirianni, people wanted to fire him, as early as or as late as like October.
Yeah.
So, it is interesting, and maybe to their detriment, the way the fans are in Philly and the way there's a certain amount of toxicity when it comes to
Mhm.
Philadelphia fanhood. And although there's no more loyal group of fans here in Columbus, I know 2 Philadelphia Eagles fans, and I am familiar with another one, and they are super loyal to their team. So, it is what it is. They deserve to win. You're right. The fact that they didn't blitz the whole night
Yeah.
was pretty incredible. Reminded me a little bit kind of what a Michigan team did to Ohio State in
Mhm.
the game this year, but also what Ohio State was able to do. Now they blitz more, but Ohio State with 3 and 4 man pressure against Texas and Notre Dame really got home quite a bit. So
Yeah.
it was interesting to see. Sometimes you disguise what you're doing, but you don't really bring extra. And I think the Eagles just did a masterful job. And you know, it didn't make it the most fun game because it was such a lopsided game, but at the same time, certainly as Bengals fans, we're probably pretty happy to see Mahomes go down. What do you think in that first AJ Brown offensive pass interference call? What were you with the many that were like, "Yep, see, it's
Yeah.
rigged."
I had that written down. I said, the AJ Brown flag on that first drive felt like a here we go again moment.
It did.
And I actually it's funny I said I in the middle of the game I turned to my friend and I know it was like a blowout and maybe I would have felt different if it was closer, but I thought the game was actually pretty well refed
Yeah.
and there wasn't like a lot of they kind of just let him play. I think it was definitely some calls that maybe would have been called differently in the regular season. I think they kind of let him go in the Super Bowl, but I felt the same way. I'm sure everyone felt like that. I was at a bar with all my friends and the whole place like erupted when that flag happened. They're like, "Oh my gosh, are we seriously going to have to sit through another just ref show in the Super
Yeah.
Bowl?" But it turned out to be pretty much the opposite of that.
Well, it kind of goes along with what I told someone I think on Saturday or earlier on Sunday. It's kind of like the fact that the Mahomes led Chiefs are able to just be in so many close games.
Mhm.
Because let's face it, their numbers this year and even last year haven't been like they don't say, "Oh, that's super team right there." They just get the job done and win games. But the fact that they're in all these close games means that any kind of call either way could be construed as such. Whereas, like in a blowout, it doesn't matter. Like no
Exactly.
no 4th and 17 pass interference call when
Mm-mm.
Mahomes chucks it down the field against the Bengals early in the season is going to result in a Bengals loss if it's a 10-point game instead of a
Mhm.
2 or 2 point game. So that's where it is. So okay, when you're watching that game, and even for me, it was more watching when the Bills played the Ravens and the Bills played the Chiefs. But when you're watching that game, do you see anything that said, hey, could the Bengals have done this? Could you have inserted the Bengals in somebody's spot? And could they have done it? What were your thoughts?
I I like to think they could have gone on a little run, especially with how hot they got at the end of this year and this team. But we talked about it. I think it's this postseason showed that the Bengals still have a bit of a ways to go with what they need to do. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, if that makes sense, because I feel like they've already addressed some holes. Like we talked about, they new defensive coordinator that's completely restarting with how that worked. The defense needs to be exponentially better. The team also needs to go out and spend this money that they have available. And I think the blueprint's there. And I feel like they've not really had a blueprint per se the last couple of years because they kind of just took that Super Bowl momentum and rolled with it for 3 years and it didn't really work. So now I think there's a clear cut example on what the Bengals need to do. And even though it sounds negative saying that they're a ways away, doesn't mean they're super far away. It means they just need to like patch a couple of things here and there, but I just don't I think they would have gotten killed by Philadelphia. And we saw that in the regular season. It just we weren't there defensively. And the season is the perfect example. We had the best offense in the NFL from a pure pl- receiver quarterback realm, and it didn't pay off. So they got to figure it out. They really do. And I didn't walk away frustrated or anything. It's more hopeful, but it's just like they can't just roll the same deal out next year and hope that something changes.
Right, I agree with that, and
Yeah.
certainly, while we say it's a defensive problem, the defense was the problem in most of those games. What we saw that Eagles defensive line do in the Super Bowl and even to the Bengals there in the regular season, that would have been very concerning, right? In a in
Mhm.
a Super Bowl if the Bengals took the place of the Chiefs. But let's face it though, Owen, I mean, not only us as fans, there were national people and local media guys who said that the Bengals could be a Super Bowl contender in 2024. It wasn't a far fetched thing. It wasn't like it would have been if you would have said in 2021, "Hey, the Bengals are going to go to the Super Bowl." We would have all been laughed at.
Mhm.
And in 2024 August, up until the first week of the season, and then even after a few hiccups, it was still kind of this team could be
Yeah,
a Super Bowl team. So the defensive side of the ball worries us and all that, and protection still remains an issue no matter what they've done. So
totally.
you've got to see that. All right, with that in mind, we're going to turn toward the offseason in full force between you and me and Tim Daniel. I'm sure in these coming months leading up to the draft and even as free agency comes and goes, we're going to be talking a lot about possibilities and about, what our needs and things like that. But I wanted to come up with each of us to come up with 3 storylines for the offseason. Okay. And so I guess I'll say my number one. I put both of these guys in this, both receivers. All right. They need to re-sign Chase so he's on board and ready to go come training camp and he's not a hold in or a holdout.
Mhm.
And they need to come to a decision on T. And that's what I was talking about earlier. That's going to happen. It's just going to happen. Even if they were to franchise him, which I don't think they will, and even if T decides he's not going to report, that's still something, right? So
Yeah,
you sign him, you franchise him, or you say goodbye, right? I think those are the 3 options. You could franchise him with an understanding between he and his agent that we're going to continue to work, but that's kind of the parameters. So time is the decision factor there. Something's going to happen. T just tweeted a little bit ago, and he said, "I'll let you all know first." I don't know if he was talking to us here at Welcome to the Jungle per se, or all of Twitter, but he's going to let us know, and we're going to find out. And he wants it to be sooner than later, right?
Yeah, I it's funny because Jamar Chase ended up having such an incredible season, but I gotta remember him starting off slow. And don't you agree that it kind of and there's frustrations with the team with the
Yeah.
hold in and hold out. Like I agree with you. I think it's absolutely critical that this doesn't turn into a whole ordeal. It'd be it just isn't like we talked about before. These aren't really tough decisions. It's all a money thing that they got to figure out. The choice to keep them is a no-brainer, but I would appreciate from both sides. I love what you said there that it cannot be a even if we get to like May and there's not it won't even last that long, especially if like a Jamar Chase deal. It just needs to be done quick because
Mhm.
they can't go into the draft not having this locked up. I feel like
Where did the receivers rank on kind of your priority list? Was that your top as well?
I didn't put it on my storyline. I kind of went like more question based on
Okay.
like what they would address, but I think that's a no brainer top priority from what the team needs to accomplish.
hmm Um, and then the $1 million question, or the $28 million per year, if that's what T ends up getting.
Mhm.
Um, the key question is, do you think they'll re-sign Higgins? And I guess what are your thoughts?
I think both sides want to make it happen. And we can kind of fade into my storyline
Go
here,
ahead.
which number one is how serious is Joe Burrow about taking a restructure to his contract? He said it on TV a couple weeks last weekend that he's be willing to do that and backload his deal to keep these guys around. All right, prove it to us. Like, let's get it done. Because there's no way that this is all going to work unless you make something happen.
Right.
And I very appreciative of Joe Burrow being so open about wanting to keep these guys, but at the same time, he needs to do his part, and that is restructuring the deal, taking a cut on his contract to keep his other guys around. So that was my number one storyline: is how serious is he going to be to restructuring this deal? What's that going to look like? And then from there, I think if it is restructured, I think they can keep everyone because then it'll make the money work.
Yeah, I guess one thing I was learning recently, Joe Goodberry on Twitter, he's a very good follow. He talked a little bit about how, because number one, even if Jamar gets a deal done, it'll be a lot like Burrow last year, where it's a fifth-year option anyway. So
Mhm.
you're extending to that. So he'd still be playing on that fifth-year option
Yeah.
number. And then even Joe Burrow, I don't think his cap hit's quite as high. It's higher this
Mhm.
year
Yeah.
than it will be coming up the next few years. So the question is, he might not even have to yet, right?
Mhm.
Restructure it. It might be a yes, I will, but get these guys in here and we'll worry about that next year. And I don't think it doesn't seem to me that they would have to. I don't think he'd have to take less money. In fact, I
Yeah.
don't think he will take less money. But what you see all the time is kind of fiddling around with the guaranteed dollars, turning something into a bonus that originally was, and it really only matters that given year, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see about that. I think he is definitely willing to restructure, and I think we could see that happen. What do you have as your number two kind of question for the year?
Yeah, what does my storyline for that is what does an Al Golden draft class look like? What are we doing in the draft? It's obviously going to stem from some pending free agency decisions and potentially out on the defense, but what does we know what a Lou draft looks like. What does an Al Golden draft look like? I think we're going to learn a lot about him and his personality and kind of confirming thoughts we already had about his scheme come draft time.
Yeah, and that kind of ties in with my number three, and we'll kind of talk. Let's talk about that now. Um, well, actually, let's start with two. Trey
Yeah.
Hendrickson. Do we see the Bengals go against their usual modus operandi and
Mhm.
re-sign a guy to a third contract? Basically, he's older. He's going to be He's going to be over 30. I think it'll be 31 this year, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, that's not what the Bengals usually do. So, do they go ahead and do that? And if they don't, Do you decide to trade him, which they don't really do that either.
Mhm.
so it's basically like a standoff at that point. So then
Yeah.
does Trey get upset? So that question will have to be answered at some point. But then to your point, what is Al Golden's defense? How does he mold that? My third thing was shore up the defense and with whatever
Mhm.
resources you have. And let's be honest, if you sign T, because we're assuming Chase is getting signed, it's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
If you sign T and you give Hendrickson an extension, the draft almost becomes the best place for you to go ahead and make sure defense gets shored up.
I don't even know about best. I think it might be kind of the only
Yeah,
place to go because they're not going to have enough. They're not going to have really any ability to go out and sign someone unless it's on a cheaper deal, which kind of connects to my third point which is who is this year's Mike Gesicki?
mm-hmm.
Who is the guy they sign at the middle of free agency to a 1 or 2 year $3 million, $4 million deal that just kind of explodes and we get the best bang for their buck. And I think that's an interesting point because we've seen the Bengals kind of hit on these guys the last 3 or 4 years. And I think it's good. I think I appreciate these flyers that they take on guys, especially on the offensive side of the ball to fill up some holes. And I think they could potentially do something like that on defense as well. I don't 100% know who that flyer could be on defense, but they've got a proven track record of a guy that's showed himself in the NFL, maybe hasn't been able to fit into the system to the perfect extent of his abilities and kind of finding a good home for guys here in Cincinnati.
Well, and you mentioned Mike Gesicki. He needs to be kind of put on those lists as well because
Yeah.
Joe Burrow, during his Super Bowl media tour, he
Yeah.
included Mike. He included him along with T, Chase, and Trey. So that's interesting because they've done this rent a tight end to some success, and then of course Irv Smith was no success involved
Mm-mm.
there. But to your point, Hayden Hurst and even Uzama playing him in his last year, and then deciding not to re-sign him. It's worked, but I think it's clear that they would like to see Gesicki back if you're Joe Burrow and company, and that goes back into the thing we've talked about before that Gesicki kind of filled Tyler Boyd's role a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He's a tight end who's more of a slot receiver, and I see that it's been interesting talking about that with both Ohio State as they're going to reload here with a guy from Purdue who's not a blocking tight end, right, Claire,
He's the
and
St.
so,
X guy.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So they're gonna reload that way, and so it's gonna be a similar question. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how much are you using Emeka Ibuka snaps for another slot receiver, or are you giving it to Max Clare? So we're gonna see it here with the Bengals. Do they keep Gesicki? And if they don't, you almost have to shore up two positions because
Yeah.
your slot receiver needs to be filled a little better too. Yeah, and the defense side, I wonder too how much because you're seeing like Terry Francona get a few of these Cleveland guys that he managed,
Mm-hmm.
right on the baseball side. I wonder how much Al Golden will have like even drafting, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was it? The Watts, the safety.
Yeah.
Do they go after him in this whatever round? So and then free agents or guys he's coached before. He likes Logan Wilson, so
Yeah.
he's going to get to coach him again. That'll be interesting. I'm glad you brought up or Al Golden. Al Golden, right? Why do I keep
Yeah.
why Mike Golden? I don't know. All right. So the question though of what do we think they'll do? The problem as I see it is you're judging the Bengals against themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So if this was the Eagles or this was the Rams from 2021 or many other teams because it's cash on hand versus salary cap versus guarantees versus all this stuff, you would have seen T, Jamar, and Trey already re-signed. T probably wouldn't have gotten the franchise tag. He would have been
No.
re-signed, and Jamar's extension would have been announced before last season. And Trey probably would have been re-upped last offseason.
Yeah.
And he might be coming back for more this offseason if you did, and that's one of the risks of doing things like that. But that's the problem, because you could say, oh, and you and I could say, yeah, I think the Bengals will sign T, and it's like, well, Okay, but I don't know. It doesn't fall into their normal structure, right?
And that's what makes this so difficult to talk about is
Hmm.
because this all makes sense. But I mean, you've been a Bengals fan longer than I have, but the whole time I've understood this the whole way that this is just how they operate. They don't they don't trade. They don't extend past a third contract. So then it's just like this. My biggest fear for the offseason is that this Trey Hendrickson thing kind of turned into a mess because I think it really could because of what you said. The Bengals aren't going to want to they already kind of said the writing on the wall with what Tobin said. He's like, well, it might happen, it might not. It's kind of up to both sides to figure it out. Well, yeah, that's a negotiation, but you have to pay your good players. And it's just hard for the non-Bengals fan to see that, is to be like, I think people are also starting to realize that now, this new age of football fans who is understanding that like the Bengals just operate in such a unique pattern and it really is to their detriment. And it's I don't know. I think Trey Hendrickson could get really messy. And it's a big fear.
Yeah, I hope not. But I guess that's the problem. It's not black and white. It's not. I'm not going to say they're not cheap. It's not just that they're cheap, or they are, they aren't. But because the fact is, over the years before this more modern era, let's go back 10 years, right?
Mhm.
They signed guys with the intention of having them play their entire contract.
Yeah.
They weren't fancy 5-year deals that were really only 3-year deals. Okay. And that's what a lot of the league was doing. Even I remember like the Redskins, that was their name back then. They signed like guys like Bruce Smith and Deion Sanders and all these guys that were over the hill. And it's saying, well, we're going to give you this 7-year contract. Well, no, it's a 2-year contract.
Yeah.
And so the Bengals didn't do that. So if you were willing to play your contract out and they were going to allow you to play your contract out, then you were going to make all that money, and it was good money. And they've always paid their quarterbacks. You go back to Boomer
Yeah.
Esiason, you go to Carson Palmer, you go to Andy Dalton, now you go to Joe Burrow. They've always paid quarterbacks. So they're not cheap. They just have a different way of looking at it. And
Yeah.
it can come off as either cash on hand just isn't there,
Mhm.
or they're pocketing way more money than you might think. Because you know as well as I do that the Rams ownership and all the money they have tied up around SoFi Stadium, and they have a tenant in the Chargers, and Kroenke is making money hand over fist. He can afford to
Yeah.
give Odell Beckham or all these guys money back in 21 and build the roster that's going to win the Super Bowl. They might have paid for it the next few years, which they have
Yeah. And
with
they've
where
done
the
that with
roster is.
luxury tax, etc. And yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, the Bengals just, I mean, why would a franchise like Cincinnati finally change the name of the stadium? Well, they needed
Mhm.
cash. It's Pay Joe Stadium, as Cincy
Mhm.
shirts advertised. So they needed cash because they don't have the revenue streams that the Cowboys, Patriots, and Rams and some other teams have. So, and I'm not making excuses for them.
No,
I wish they would look at it differently. But also, let's remember, Bill Belichick was famous for cutting or trading guys a year before. Like he probably would have traded Trey Hendrickson before last year,
totally.
and he still built, you know, how many Super Bowl winners, right? So, I it is what it is. But that's why it's hard to know or to understand what they're going to do with Jamar, and Trey.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm judging them against their history, and it doesn't make sense.
It the thing about the history that is interesting to me is that they've also always kind of paid their number one receivers, but if
Yeah.
they have a second one, they don't get that cut. So like they paid AJ.
Hmm.
They kept Ocho around forever. So it's like the Bengals have always taken care of their guys, but just how they operate, like you said, like the Brown family, their business is the Bengals. Kroenke has, I don't whatever tech or whatever
Real estate too, I think.
real estate. That's where he's made his money. The problem with the Bengals, and it's not a problem because I love the family business aspect of it, but it's to their detriment. It doesn't like you said, they can't afford to take these giant swings and misses that some of these different organizations can. And whether or not it is could be judged as a swing and a miss, I just think for for the sake of what they have now, because this is probably the best core group of Bengals players they've had in team history. And Boomer was great, but Joe Burrow is probably the best quarterback the team will have superstar wise and by pure ability. You cannot let this go to waste. And if you can just go out of your way for a 5-year span to kind of go against the grain of what you've done, and then you can go back to it for all I care, but just make it work with what you have now, because it is unacceptable with how these last 2 years have gone. I don't really The injury year is weird, but last year was unacceptable of how it all had all turned out.
Yeah, and I think if anything, there's evidence because if you go to the 2021 season and the 5 years or so before that, I mean, I don't even like the the joke wasn't it that the stadium didn't even have a pizza company, right? And it's like now there's a name for everything,
Yeah.
like because of
Yeah.
Joe Burrow, because of a Super Bowl run, because all this happened in the era that it did, they are printing money on all sorts of different. They're putting names on everything. Every press release has a different
Yeah.
name, a different sponsor. They're doing more, and I just have to believe, to your point, that if they did enough to go, and it's the same with the Reds. I mean,
Yeah.
if you do enough to take that next step, the money will come.
Yeah.
And so it just, I guess, it comes down to, and again, we don't know the money they take home each, like
Exactly.
Mike Brown and the family. I don't know. I don't know the exact
And it's
amount.
not really even our place to judge or whatever, but it's
No.
just but it's fair. They need to do more. It's just like they can't put this to waste.
Right, and it's too simple to say spend money to make money, but it kind of
Yeah,
feels that way at this point. And you're going to
you're
make
right.
money if you win. And there's some people out there like baseball franchises and things like that. They're content just to tread water and make the money, the guaranteed money they're going to make. And like that's why Mark Cuban said he never bought a baseball team, is because like the
Mhm.
Pirates or whomever, whichever team, he says their owner's not going to sell. Why would their owner sell? He called it passive income, where they don't have to do
Mhm.
anything and they still make money. And so I don't know. I'm going too far astray here.
No, we've gone really off the grain, but I've loved this conversation.
Yeah, it's just important. And here we are, two fans, so trying to spend other people's money, and that's kind of where it is. So, but at the same time, I think we hit the nail on the head because they need a better defense, and they need to make sure they do what they need to do to get that. And then I don't know. I would hate to see T. Higgins go, but if they can't come to some reasonable, and again, it's judging them against themselves. You can't pay both guys number one money. Like
No.
you can't pay Jamar 40 and T 38 or something like
No.
that, right, per year, annual value. So, and I know that's not what they're saying T's looking for or going to get, but he's going to get level of above a number two receiver, and so
Mhm.
that's going to be tough. So, all right, well, hey Owen, it's been fun, except for the part where we got sad about whether or not they can do things.
Hey.
I appreciate you sitting in with me, and I know we're going to be here every week, at least once weekly, taking you through the off season. Welcome to the Jungle will be here every step of the way. And if there's need for an emergency podcast, Tim, Owen, or myself, or some version of two of the three of us will jump in and talk about the T signing whenever that happens. Right. So that I'm just
Yeah.
speaking it into existence. Go
We're
ahead,
just
man.
gonna speak all of it into existence.
My son, my 9-year-old, wore his T Higgins jersey to school today. So I am hoping I actually, it still says 85 on it. So I actually had promised him if he re-signs with the Bengals, I'll get him a 5.
There you go.
See, Bengals, if you sign him, you're going to make a little extra money. So there you go. All right. For Owen Timmerding, I am Seth Shaner. Send in comments. Join the Patreon. We talk a lot of Bengals on there. And I think, we need to start doing a little better job. Tim does better than I do at this. We'll start maybe doing some viewer mail on this show as well as we do with the Reds show. So check that out. And thanks for tuning in. Owen, have a great day.
You too, Seth.